Galt, and my proposition is about why universal health care would not work in America. So for those of you who don't know, universal health care is basically where the government pays for all medical expenses, and usually does so by raising taxes or cutting government programs. A few third world countries have it. France has it, and Canada has it, and I'm not sure if any others have it. But it sounds like a good system, but there's actually quite a few cons to the system. I mean, mostly high taxes, as I mentioned earlier, is my first point. So since this system is paid for through taxes, you'd have to raise taxes in order to have this type of system in America. And we have a system similar called Medicare. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with that, but it's basically a socialized medicine type system for people above 65. And there's actually quite a few flaws with that currently. And also, I don't think the government, my second point would be, I don't think the government would be able to handle a system like this because they're very inefficient most of the time. A few examples are Social Security and Medicare, like I mentioned earlier. And since the medical field is a very time-critical field, it requires efficiency in it, otherwise things don't get done when they need to be. So my first point is that the taxes have to be raised in order for the universal health care to work. So basically, all expenses have to be paid, otherwise there's leakage somewhere in the system, and that's not good. So taxes would have to be raised because social programs are hardly ever cut in America. According to the Council on Foreign Relations, which is an American nonprofit and nonpartisan organization focused on improving the understanding of U.S. foreign policy and national affairs, the United States spent 16% of its GDP in 2007 on health-related issues. So I figured out how much that would cost per person. According to the CIA, the U.S.'s GDP for 2007 was an estimated $14.1 trillion. So 16% of 14.1 trillion is $2.256 trillion. And if we take that number and divide it by the U.S. population, we would, which Wikipedia estimated to be 307 million people in the U.S. for 2009. And this answer shows us that each person would have to pay around $7,331 annually. That may seem like a small amount, but considering the average household makes around $50,000, that's 15% of their income, and that's before taxes. So that would be a significant increase for payments. So my second point is that the government would be ill-equipped to handle a complicated system, such as a medical system like this. For those like I mentioned earlier, Medicare is a universal health care plan for people above 65, and it has some issues currently. In Medicare's 2008 annual report to Congress, they speculated that they would be completely out of funds by 2017, which Medicare was actually started in 1960, and if the previous claim were true that Medicare would run out by 2017, that would mean that the organization only existed for 70 or 57 years before failing financially, and that's with government help and everything. And I don't think that's a good system to have, something that would fail that quickly. But the other example I mentioned earlier was Social Security. And Social Security is a social insurance that everyone is required to pay into if they have a job. So the normal scenario for how you pay that is basically they take a portion of your paycheck out of a portion of your paycheck and tax it basically. And it goes to this trust fund responsible for all the branches of Social Security. And the problem with Social Security is that all the assets of Social Security are held in the Treasury. So if they ever get cut short, they basically have to borrow from the government, which that means that if they have to, this is all fine if they borrow from the government. It's fine if they do it like externally, but internally it causes a lot of problems because then you get a lot of debt building up within the government, and that's not good. And then this also means that since Social Security has to borrow often from the government, that it's eventually going to run out of funds to pay it all, and they'll just be borrowing solely from the government. And these are two examples of like government-run programs. I don't think the government would be able to handle a system such as universal health care. So my first point was that it would increase taxes significantly. And my second point was that I believe the government would not be able to handle such a complex system such as health care. And these are two reasons why I believe universal health care would not work in America.
All right, Casey, the proposition is identified, but when you present it, it's really put in the form of a question. It sounded to me like you were giving a preview twice in the presentation, and you need to really cut down on that background introductory material and cut to the 2 points that you're going to focus on. The comparisons, I think, are okay as long as you explain why they're comparable. Medicare, it might make sense as to why it's comparable. Social Security, you have to have a clear explanation about why it's something that we should be using to judge, a universal health care system on. The calculation that you came up with the cost was an interesting process. You explained it in detail, and you kind of put it in perspective. I thought that worked pretty well. I thought you had a little bit more structure at the end when you organized the speech and summarized it than you had earlier in the speech. All right, we've got one more speaker, so let's dive into that. Kevin, that's you.